don't think we have anything else as far as housekeeping goes, so we'll jump right into the talks. Leta Keane is first. Leta's an instructor at Turing School, Turing.io, if you're interested in the URL there. She's in Denver, Colorado, and she teaches front end developers about like the deep bits of JavaScript, the nuts and bolts of how JavaScript works, which is great because I love JavaScript. I think a lot of people do. Um, Leta has a lot of interests and loves science and empathy for the people and readable code that's not just clever, and high fives too, which is great. Unfortunately, we can't give her a high five right now because we're all separate. But when we get back together, we'll give her a high five. Yeah.
Virtual high fives.
Yeah, exactly. Leta tweets about coding, science, writing, social justice issues, and embarrassingly personal things at Leta Codes, LetaCodes. So, Leta, I'll hand it off to you. Thanks for being here.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to get to my slides in just a little bit, but I wanted you to be able to put a face to the awkward voice. It's going to be narrating the slides. Yes, hello. As introduced earlier, my name's Leta. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Yeah, I work over at Turing, although I guess technically I work at home, but for Turing. Yeah, I'm very excited to share this talk about Svelte and Sapper. I just got into Svelte for fun, and it's great. I really love it. I'm primarily a React dev, but I think I might like Svelte better. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I really love Svelte. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to jump in. If at some point, like slides don't show up or something goes wrong, like I'm just going to count on my 4 gallery panel over here to just like wave wildly to get a hold of my attention. Okay, cool. So great, we're going to be talking about Svelte and Sapper. So to begin with, just a little bit more about me. Won't spend too much time. Yeah, I really like wholesome GIFs, including this one of the axolotl with an extremely delayed reaction. Like I just whenever I see it, I have to watch it like 4 times because it's so great. This is often how I feel learning code, where it's like, here's the really obvious thing. And then it's like 5 years later, I'm like, oh, that's how that works. So that's like, if this is not making a ton of sense to you, like that's okay. Maybe it will later. So first, we're going to talk about Svelte, which is the framework that I don't know, maybe even hearing some buzz about it. And after that, we're going to get into Sapper, which is like kind of a template built on top of Svelte a little bit. It's kind of like Nuxt if you're used to Nuxt and React. So first of all, Svelte. I don't know about you. When I first heard about Svelte, I just had a sinking feeling because front end burnout, it's real. There's so many different frameworks and all of them update all the time, like especially React. So I was kind of loath to get into it. I had a coworker who was really excited telling me all about it, and I didn't look at it for a long time because I was kind of salty about it. But the interesting thing about Svelte, it's not just another framework on top of a landscape of frameworks. The way it works is it's actually a compiler. It compiles your entire code base on the back end, and once it serves it up, it's a single static page. So it's designed to be written with less code. As much as I love React, there is a lot of surface area to it. You have to learn a lot of new syntax. You just have to write a lot of code to accomplish small things. So Svelte was designed, I mean, it's called Svelte, which means like lean, trim. Um, so it's designed to have as little surface area as possible, and to be as close to writing vanilla HTML and JavaScript as possible. So here's just an example of Svelte in action. So you can see we see a script tag. I see some HTML. This is all in a file that ends with .svelte, but there's a lot of plugins that you can use for your text editors that highlight it like HTML. So it's basically we're writing inline JavaScript in our HTML files. So up here, I've got a variable name with Nathaniel, and we have this greeting string, and it's prefixed with this $sign. We're going to get into a little bit what that is later, but greeting is going to be this interpolated template literal with hello, whatever the name is. We have a function that when it runs, it updates the value of name to danger. And then you can just see this very kind of boring HTML. We've got our greeting variable interpolated in using single curly braces. And then we have our button. We attach an event listener using this on colon click syntax. And again, we use those curly brackets to reference our reveal true name function. Um, what is going to output from this code? We start with this page, and when that button is clicked, it updates the name. Cool. Hooray. Okay, so super simple. We're going to dig a little bit more into it. But from a broad view, um, one of the big issues that a lot of front end frameworks face is how to control reactivity. React is built where instead of diffing an entire page and reloading a whole page, you can scope that change to a single component. So if something, the state of that component updates, if some value changes, if a new property is passed in, um, then only that component updates on the page. So it minimizes the amount of processing time, it minimizes the amount of lag that it takes to update a page. However, Svelte takes it even further because diffing an entire component, uh, that also takes time and is expensive. So the way that Svelte works is that you write your code, you write your Svelte, the compiler turns it into super fast static pages. So basically what's happening is that anything that you have that needs to be changed or updated, instead of that entire component that it's a part of having to be diffed and checked for changes and then updated, anything that could possibly be reactive. When Svelte compiles it, it writes custom functions to handle just that piece of reactivity. So it's down to diffing like individual functions and just waiting for those to run when when it detects a change. So it makes for extremely fast performant applications, which is super cool. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about writing Svelte because I don't know about you, like hearing all these high level conceptual things is cool and exciting, but I don't get excited about learning a new framework or a new piece of tech until I can see like writing the code. So the docs, I highly recommend the Svelte docs. They're some of the most friendly, accessible documentation that I've like ever seen. Very, very fun to play around with. So, one of the things I really love, it's almost just plain old HTML and JavaScript. It's super familiar. There's very little lift with learning a strange syntax, like with JSX. At first, it's really strange to do, and writing like function components or like class-based components in React. There's a lot of lifting to do to figure out how to put things together. With Svelte, you're basically just writing HTML. You have a plain old script tag. You can bring in, oh, I put styles plural. Whoops, sorry, that should be style singular. A style tag, whatever styles you add in this single file, they only apply to that file. So they don't bleed out from another nested component like style stay scoped, which is cool. Then you just literally write some HTML. That's it. So it's pretty easy to bring into a project and to jump into because you can add in as much of the Svelte sugar as you want, but you can just start with just basically writing some HTML. Like Vue, hopefully you've noticed that if you know Vue, sorry, I don't want to assume that you do, um, your your scripts, so your data, your JavaScript, your logic, your styling, and your structure all lives in the same file for a single component. So instead of being dispersed across multiple files, like a separate style file and a separate logic file and a separate like template file, it's all in one place. So that's also kind of nice and friendly as well. Cool. Let's talk a little bit more about these reactive assignments. So I have this script tag. I have an adjective, which is cool. We have a function here called make ratter, which when it runs, it updates the adjective to say tubular instead of cool. And then we have this h1 says Nick is totally cool, which is true. Nick Teets, hello, shout out. Nick Teets is the reason I'm giving this talk. So thank you so much for connecting me up with JAMStack. When we click this button, this on click says make ratter. So when we see this, we have Nick is cool. If this button gets clicked, it changes to Nick is totally tubular. So basically this, whoops. I tried to double click my slide. That's, that didn't work. So we can make these assignments that change, that when the value changes, it updates the front end as well. Super cool. Great. It also has its own syntax for if you want to add code that includes HTML instead of just a string. It's smart enough to, when you try to interpolate the string into your HTML, if it contains HTML, you just throw in this little tag, the at HTML tag, and it will parse it into HTML and not just a regular string. That's kind of cool. Um, if blocks, conditional rendering. So it will look kind of like conditional rendering for React, but instead of having some sort of condition and the and syntax, um, I don't know, you have your strange if tag inside here along with your condition. Whatever you're going to render, you can have an else, you can have else ifs. Um, your conditional rendering is right there. So a little more syntax, but not too much. It's kind of this weird hybrid between HTML and JavaScript. So not a terribly heavy lift, I thought. Okay. Uh, you can bring in components from other components. So if I had two components that I was importing into my script tag, I can use them, and any styling that is unique to these does not bleed out. So if nested has some text that is styled to be Comic Sans, it wouldn't make any of the rest of my text Comic Sans. Even if it's brought into another component and rendered by another component, the styles for that component, for the one that has been brought in, stay scoped, which is pretty neat. I've had a lot of headaches with styling bleeding out from components, so it's nice that they do just automatically stay scoped with Svelte. Okay, and this has just been a lot of me talking, and the teacher in me really wants to give everybody like a 5-minute break, but we're just going to keep going. So now we're going to start talking about Sapper. If you've used like Next.js or Next.js with React, it's sort of, Sapper's kind of similar for Svelte. Basically, it is a Svelte boilerplate app that brings in some other like great benefits. So I'll come back to this slide. Basically, Sapper brings in the ability to have dynamic routing and code splitting and server-side rendering. You can also offline the work using service workers, and there's some other bells and whistles that plain old Svelte doesn't give you, but if you use Sapper, it hands you those things out of the bag, ready to be used. So the docs for Sapper, which are, I think, maintained by the Svelte developers as well, so it's very well integrated. Basically, they just say, like, it's really hard to have like client-side hydration, server-side rendering, all of these complex things. So we've put it together for you so you can focus on coding instead of tooling. Um, Great. So let's actually just look at Sapper. It's easier to just see rather than explaining. So I'm going to open it up. Can you all see my code editor? Yes, great. Awesome. One of the really interesting things when you first see Sapper in action is basically, let me actually fire this up. Let me grab my npm. No, sorry. Yeah. Run dev. Let me see if I can open this up in the browser so you can see it. Localhost. Ah, whoa, that's very strange. Okay. Okay, so this is the boilerplate for Sapper. This is what you see when you fire it up before writing a lick of code. It's basically a very simple single-page application that has routing built in. So you have like a multi-page feel on a single-page application. So up here, this is our home page, nice little Borat. And then up, we've got some navigation. Let me see if I can zoom in here. Great, some additional navigation. We have an about page. Excellent. And there's also a blog feature built in along with automatic custom slugs based on what the API gives back. It's super cool. Great. So that's our boilerplate. Let's take a look at the code. All right, let's see if we can identify some of our pages. I'm just going to dive into the source file. I think that's the most exciting, interesting file. So let's take a look at our template HTML. This is just some standard HTML here, where it's kind of like our index HTML for React, where we inject, I think. Maybe I lied. This is the blog. This is the template for the blog post. Okay. So let me find Sapper. Cool. All right, let's take a look at the components. So we have a server, and the clients. The server, if you're used to writing Express, this is going to be kind of similar. There's just a server that's serving up all of our pages, the client that's consuming them. So this is where it's finding the target for where to inject the Sapper application. Okay, let's look at components and routes. So components, there's the navigation component, and that's got that styling in here. And then we just have our familiar nav tag from HTML. We also have basically just what's going to show up. We have our about page. We have some conditional rendering to figure out the styling for those things. But that doesn't look terribly interesting. So let's take a look then at routes. This is the part where we're kind of seeing more of the regular things. So we have our index page. It's probably getting served at home. So we see great success. We see our Borat image being brought in here. High five. Try editing this file. Cool. There's an about file, about.svelte. It's got our about page. We have a blog folder inside of which there's an index.svelte. And it looks like this is what's containing my blog page. So we have an each posts as a post. I don't know what that is yet, but we can take a look at it. There's a posts page. This is where our data is coming from. Interesting. Slug.json, slug.svelte. So that looks like this is what's laying out our individual blog posts. The blog title, post title, and the content of the post. Okay, interesting. So thinking more about this, what's really interesting about about Sapper, is every time you create a new page inside your routes, let's try, we'll call it potatoes.svelte. Okay. If I update my Svelte page view, nope, that didn't do it. Okay, maybe I have to actually write it. Something that, and I gotta say, I'm not the most slick with Sapper yet. I've spent more time playing with some vanilla Svelte, but something that's really great is that as you add pages, they will dynamically create routes for them as well, so long as it's in the routes folder. So my guess is I probably just have to write some code in here. So let's do this. I'm just gonna paste it in. Okay, I'm gonna collapse my style tab. I'm gonna say heart and potatoes. Great. Get rid of this figure. Wow, I need to leave my apartment. Okay. All right. So this is coming from like a severely baked, like just I've been working all day and doing things. So like my brain is about the consistency of cream cheese right now. And I also haven't been out of my apartment today. So I need to go outside. Okay, let me give this a save and see if that changes what we see on our blog. Nope, that's not it. Maybe I have to reset my server. Let's try it. Oh, I have. Great, there's an error. So let me pull over my terminal. So Svelte is telling me, hey, you've got this figure in here, and there's no figure. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of image. Great. Okay. Now, looks like it's built. Still not there. Well, sorry, gang. I should have done a little bit more research with this. But ultimately, the documentation for Sapper, sapper.svelte.dev, truly excellent. It's the docs for Svelte and for Sapper are really, really thorough and do a great job getting you started and talking through what's going on. There's also some really excellent blog posts and YouTube videos that have shown up, depending on what your learning style is. That do a great job walking through both Svelte and Sapper. I just want to show you really quickly some of the docs for Svelte and why I like them so much. Um, Basically, it walks you through. This is actual Svelte that you can totally erase this, write whatever you want. It's a great sandbox for playing with the information. As you go through, you can get hints. You can just have it shown to you, like whatever your learning style is. And literally, this build is really simple to get started with. There's a single command, simple, yeah, it's just a single command. It's very similar to create React app with npx create React app, and it's just kind of a rolled up version of Svelte that you can get started with. Sapper runs the same way. You can choose if you want to use rollup or webpack with either of those, so you can configure to your heart's content. Um, but let's see. Nope. I think that was it. That was all I had for that. So I am going to stop sharing, but basically, um, Svelte Sapper, if you're interested in taking a look and if you're really bored while you're trapped at home, maybe this is a good thing to learn. And honestly, I don't know if Svelte is going to be the big thing. I don't know if it can handle enterprise level or like production code. It's still pretty new, so it's yet to be tested. However, I'm fully a believer that even if this turns out to not be a thing that anyone's going to choose for their big product, um, and maybe it will be. Even if that's the case, I really think that useless is not the same as worthless. I heard that phrasing from Charlie Gerard at JSConf Hawaii. She built this amazing gesture recognition that hooked up to a video game and triggers like moves in the video game. Super cool. Also, not particularly useful, but definitely not worthless. So, same way, even if you're like, Svelte is not the next thing, great to learn. It's really just a joy to read docs that are well written. So I had really a lot of fun learning it, and I hope that you feel empowered to jump in as well.
Sweet, thank you, Leta. Um, so you actually kind of just talked about something that I wanted to ask you about. You said useless is not worthless. I actually kind of had a question if you could dig more into that idea of like there's a lot of JavaScript these days that's like put as much JavaScript as possible on the front end, and you're going to write JavaScript this way and it's going to run. And Svelte is sort of like you're going to do it this way and we're going to do it on the back end, and then we'll ship something that you never touch or see on the front end. Those are two really different paradigms. Do you think that one or the other is better, or like do you think one will win out ultimately? What do you think is sort of the future of like compilers versus like client runtimes?
I don't think there's ever going to be one that wins out over the other. I think it's just going to be like a battle to the heat death of the universe, because it just really depends on the team and the needs of the team. Like if you really need things to be super configurable and have a lot of control over the fine detail, like you're never going to go for a compiler. That's just kind of a magic black box. But if you have a lot of trust in the like version that you're using, and like that the team doesn't constantly update and ship breaking changes for the compiler that you are using, I don't know. I think it's worthwhile for certain applications, certain websites, certain developers and teams to have something that it's just going to really take care of a lot of the headaches and like reduce the surface area of the code for the team. I think there's benefits and drawbacks to both, and I don't know, hard to say. I think compilers are really, really nice, and I don't know. It depends on how I don't know how skeptical a team is. If you're like, I want to generate as much JavaScript as I can, so I still have a job. But I don't know. Hard to say.
Sure. Yeah, that's a tough question. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in. So people in chat, if you don't have a Twitch account, get your questions into the forum if you have them. I actually have a question. So I've heard that Svelte it could be really useful for like kind of low, like devices like an Apple Watch or like something that doesn't have a lot of horsepower behind it. Where do you kind of see that as well with Svelte, since it's designed to be kind of like really small and lightweight?
Hmm. Yeah, I can absolutely see that being the case, because if you look at the build code, it's really, really tiny. Like there is not a lot of code that gets shipped, and I think it's just because the reactivity is designed to be basically static in a certain way, where if you need to update a value, like one function will run and do that thing rather than having to have all this extra bulk with figuring out how to like read code, diff it, change it, update a DOM. There's no like virtual DOM that goes with it. There's none of this extra
Right.
abstraction that happens with a lot of other frameworks. So it does ship as very, very small, pretty static code. So I think that, yeah, for lighter devices or, you know, browsers running like older versions and everything like that, I think it could be really useful.
Nice. All right, so we do have some Twitch chat questions. So Mick Jeets, or which I know is Nick, asks, how does / can Svelte handle state management in a large code base?
Yep. So great question, Nick. I don't personally know the answer to that. I'm sure people have written up on it. I know that with Sapper, it's designed with a router in mind. So you can actually get in and write your own routes, express, like you can write your own middleware, things like that. So I know that it can query external sources, including some sort of backend. I haven't tried it out personally. I don't know what the hiccups are, but I know that there is some functionality built in, at least to Sapper, if not to Svelte natively, for the ability to query some sort of server or database.
Cool. And then AliSep2 asks, Leta, great overall of Svelte and thanks. If you could build a project with a team using Svelte, what would make you choose to use Svelte, and what would that project be?
Yeah. Ooh, interesting. Well, it would probably, just because I don't know what Svelte's capabilities are, which I think gives it an unfair disadvantage because I know that React and Redux and all those things can handle really robust products. So if I was building something really robust, at this point, I don't know. Maybe I would go with something that's been tried and tested that I know more about personally. But who knows? Maybe if I really dive deep into like stress testing Svelte on my own, I might reach for it for a bigger project. Just given what I know about its capabilities, just from my very brief, very high level understanding of Svelte and Sapper, I would be more likely to reach for that for some sort of like web page or blog. I think I don't know if it would be my first choice for a full front end application, but definitely for like for web development, it seems super great. That's not to say it couldn't be used for a more robust, fully featured application. I just don't know how it would perform. So I think I would probably use it for sites, web pages, things like that. I would know that it would perform really well in that way, and I'd have to do more research to figure out if it would perform well for something else.
Nice. And then we got, I'm going to probably mispronounce this name, Jalasi. Great presentation. Maybe a basic question, but what does debugging look like with Svelte with so much going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, super good question. To be honest, I don't know. A lot of the questions are, I'm sorry that my answers are, I don't know. But I think that is one of the main drawbacks with Svelte, is that debugging, because it is a compiler and there's so much going on inside this black box, it is harder to track down bugs. That being said, the Svelte team has been really, really mindful about devising things in such a way that there's not a whole lot of space to make those bugs. Basically, like if you have a linter or like a highlighter that highlights HTML properly, like you're probably going to catch a lot of potential bugs. The terminal, when it does that hot reloading, whenever you make and save a change, it also does a pretty good job pointing out errors. If the compile fails for any reason, it points out where and why that's happening in the code. So it kind of does a little bit of debugging on the way through the compiler. So there's hopefully less that you have to do on the other side.
Nice. And then we got a follow-up question from Mick Jeets, following up to AliSep's question. Would you recommend use of Svelte as your company's main JS framework, or opt to use it for small, self-contained apps? If the latter, is the learning curve worth it?
Interesting. Honestly, I am really on board with Svelte, but for clarity, my company's software that like I ever interact with and touch is like a static curriculum site page. So for me and for my team, there's extremely low risk at spinning up Svelte. I think it would be great for small projects as well, just to do some of that stress testing and that you could like build into like working in. One great thing about Svelte is that it's easy to bring in piecemeal. Like if you bring in Svelte, it's easy to just bring in like one Svelte file at a time, and then it'll build into the rest of your build, especially because you can configure it using Webpack or Rollup or a couple of other bundlers. So it meshes pretty seamlessly with existing projects. As far as it being worth the learning curve, I think Nick probably asked that knowing what I would say, but as like just a born educator, I'm very staunchly of the belief that any education that you're doing, regardless of its ultimate like return on investment, is always worthwhile. I think especially for developers, and especially right now living in a time where we feel really uncertain about a lot of things, and a lot of us, our response is to need to be very certain about a few things. I think one of the dangers of being a developer and being in a specialized field that requires a lot of really specific knowledge is that it can make us a little fearful to get out of that like zone of like, I'm the master of my own sphere, which is interesting because if you ask any developer, we all say like, oh, we're constantly learning, we're constantly like having to be doing research and learning and everything like that. But I think a lot of us, we actually really like that feeling of like knowing what we're doing. So I think forcing yourself to learn something, especially something that is as friendly to get into as Svelte, it's just a great practice at remembering what it's like to be a rookie. And I think that's that mindset, that curiosity, that humility, that ability to ask questions without shame, like is a refresh that we all need at all times, wherever you are in the progress of learning, whether you're like 10 years into your career as a dev or you're like still a couple years out from really diving in. Like that mindset is such great practice for being a great developer and a great teammate.
Awesome. Well, let me check the form one more time, but I think we got all the questions.
While he's doing that, Leta, I have one last question. You mentioned sort of in passing as you're talking through your slides that there are like plugins and extensions for Svelte and maybe even for Sapper. Can you just talk about that briefly, like what the ecosystem looks like, and even if you saw something cool that you hadn't seen before or something interesting?
Yeah, definitely. I really, honestly, I don't know. Yeah, I haven't, but I know there is a lot of buzz, so it's growing. Svelte is definitely not dying out. It's getting more and more traction. I'm hearing it more and more places, and maybe that's confirmation bias. But I know if you look on like Code Sandbox, there's tons of Svelte projects being spun up. The forums and everything for Svelte, they're really lively and active. I I don't know. I don't think there's nothing that I can recommend to be like, this is really cool. You should go check that out. But it is a really interesting community. There's obviously like there's a Svelte like Reddit channel, and that's got some really great conversation going on too. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. Zach, have we got any more questions?
It does not look like it, so.
Cool. Well, Leta, thank you so much for that talk about Svelte. That was super cool to see, and I'm glad we got to. Glad I got to talk to somebody who's used it, because I've seen things like this, but never actually talked to anybody. So thank you so much for that.